So about 7 years ago, the VA hospital said I should go have aquatherapy. So I was having individual pool time, which was great. Had about 8 or 10 sessions, and then they said I graduated and I went to the big pool. And I didn't know anybody at the big pool, and there were about 30, 40 guys there. I'm not sure it was my first time, but it was close to it. Swimming my laps back and forth. And I look up and this gentleman looked at me and he said, "You splashed me." I thought to myself, and I just thought, okay, and stepped swimming. And looked up again, and he really mad. "You splashed me again." And I should have just kept swimming, but I said to him, "Well, you know, it's a pool." And then I got, a lot of F-bombs coming out. And he was really angry, and I could feel myself getting angry. And Herb stepped in. And I never met Herb. Herb said, "Hey, you have a perfect right to do what you're doing. Go swim your laps. It'll be okay." And he just handled it so wonderfully. I mean, I just said, okay, and swim my laps. So, wanted to get to know him after that. And it was so wonderful. And it became apparent, the command sergeant major, the way he diffused just that little situation, which was nothing to him, and handled it so wonderfully, that it was such an honor to get to know him. So I spent a lot of time over at Cindy's and Jerry's and having lunch with our friends, and he was just such a wonderful gentleman that it never did escape me that what a wonderful person he is, what an authentic human being he was. And maybe that's because of all of the living that he did, it really did show. All the way through. Even in his passing, he was remarkable to me how well he handled it. And certain things that happened during the passing were remarkable to me too, the way he was. Who does what he did? Who does 34 years in the military, command sergeant major, and then goes out and gets a 4-year degree? That doesn't happen to that many people. Who finds love in their 80s at a second time? I have lots of friends in the 40s, 50s, 60s that can't find it. That's remarkable to me, and that's a tribute to her. He loved my wife, which is really great. He called her go-getter girl. Yeah, I'll miss him. And
is there anyone else that would like to make some comments?
I think everyone here knows at least part of her by his stories, because he had, there's 50 pages of biography about him, and that doesn't capture a tenth of the stories. And some of the stories are serious, and some of them are humor, but some of them just, for me, capture who he was. And he was a street smart guy who just understood people in a profound way. And at the same time, he used to joke that, that when the officers had to deal with a enlisted person who was not behaving, there was a thing called Article 13 of the UCMJ, which is all the penalties and what you do. And he said, as an NCO, he worked on Article 5, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there are two stories about this. One was that he and a couple buddies were, this was at Fort Ord, at a local bar, having some drinks, and this other guy was just being a jerk to everyone, you know. So he came up at one point, took a drink out of Herb's beer glass. Another point, you know, he punched the bartender. Another point, he grabbed the cigarette out of one of Herb's buddies' mouths and ripped a piece of skin off, and that was enough for Herb. He said, "We're going outside." Took him outside, did his thing, came in the next day, and people said, "Oh boy, are you in trouble? That was a captain you put in the infirmary last night." Well, fortunately for him, this is how Herb has just the luck that this guy was already on his way out for disciplinary, and Herb testified in this captain's court-martial. So instead of getting in really serious trouble, he ended up being a star. Another time, and I don't know where this was, he said there was this one corporal who just was mouthing off at everyone, and he said, "You know, you just can't do this anymore." And the guy goes, "What are you gonna do about it?" And so they went over to this other building that was empty, and all I remember him telling me was, the guy was a pretty good fighter, but he closed his eyes when he threw a punch.
Oh.
After that corporal caused no one any problems. And so he could deal with officers and generals, he could deal with enlisted people, he could deal with anyone where they needed to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And for all that, he was never, in my experience of him, a drill sergeant. He wasn't like, "You gotta do this." It's just like, what do we gotta get done? What's happening here? And so it was a real joy to have him in our house.
Anyone else?
I served in, I found out I had served in Vietnam, not at the same time, but in the same place in the Central Highlands, dealing with the indigenous people. I was an advisor, so his unit provided security for me, but just knowing he had dealt with the same prehistoric, in a way, tribe. We spent a lot of time together until I stopped going to the pool, and I just happened to find out 2 days ago that we were having his memorial today. I have his picture in my home.
I gotta tell one story, and I have this picture in my home as well. Herb was real special, as you all know. But anyway, I'll tell this story if I can keep it together. I kind of talked him into going to what they call the Gathering of the Chiefs. It was up at Travis Air Force Base, and Herb was, at first he didn't really want to do this thing. I said, it's kind of a special thing where all the E9s would gather at this, it's a very formal affair. So I talked him into putting that uniform on right there with all the stripes and command sergeant major. And of course we went twice. But the second time was extra special. He walked in, and we're all in our dress attire. And of course, the younger troops there, you know, they were amazed at his, years of service. And we sat at the table, and as at the end of this thing, it was a big formal dinner, and then they start going through they want to identify the most senior enlisted person there. And of course, they're all E9s from all services. So as they go through the data rank, all us youngsters are raising our hand when we made E9. The last man standing was Herb, the most senior man in the room. And of course, they said, how would you like to come up, Sergeant Major, and give a few words? So he jumped up, walked up to the podium, and starts off with a joke that just, but I tell you, the guy, he told a few stories about some of his career and some of the generals he'd worked for. And at the end of this, they awarded him with a few, I don't know, there was a couple of, I think it was like a $100 gift certificate and a few other things. But at the end, of course, we're sitting kind of over in the corner. I think every chief in the room came by and shook his hand and talked to him. And of course, they gave us all these little wine glasses and what have you. But and then the other thing that was kind of special about it, at the end, in the Air Force, our quarters are a little better than some of the Army and Marine.
Really?
They set us up with a chief suite, and of course, Herb and I shared the suite, and it was a 2-bedroom suite, and Herb, I forced him to take the master suite, which was really nice, and he said, Dan, he said, you guys live too good in there. He said, we don't do this in the Army. So, but anyway, that was one of my very special memories, and we became real close after these two, and then of course, towards the end, I was on alert. I was calling everybody I knew up at Travis, trying to find out when this next gathering of the chiefs was going to be, and it never developed. And of course, as we all know, Herb passed on May the 3rd, and we didn't get to go. But he wanted to take Pauline as his guest to the next one, and of course I was going to take my wife. He and I were batching it together the first 2 times. But anyway, that's my story, and it was most special.
I just wanted to say briefly that one of the things that I appreciated about Herb was his positive attitude. And no matter how grim the situation or how grim his personal prognosis might be, he was always looking forward. Things could always get better, and he never really got down. And he wouldn't let you get down when you were around him either. So he was a real inspiration right to the end of living for the moment, being alive, and thinking about being alive rather than worrying about what was going to come next. So he was a lot of fun to be around because of that, and he'd always have a big positive greeting. Always good to see you, and I really enjoyed my friendship with him.